Is renting for life really that bad? That's what I'm going to be talking about today. Okay, so getting right into this, the rent versus buy debate has long divided financial experts and aspiring homeowners with no clear winner in sight. And that's because it is subjective at the end of the day. I don't think this is an objective topic. The traditional argument holds. While buying a home can build long-term equity and stability, renting can provide flexibility and fewer upfront costs. But as home ownership becomes a far-fetched dream for many young Canadians, can renting for life be a viable option? Alex Avery, author of The Wealthy Renter, thinks so. So I think that what I think is that if our housing market didn't appreciate so much, people wouldn't care as much about not being renters, right? Like if you look at our market, housing is a very divisive topic. You have a whole bunch of people who bought a home pre-2015 who are worth hundreds of thousands of dollars because they bought a home, right? And then you have a whole bunch of people who missed that run up and bought after it or haven't bought at all, who are nowhere near worth the amount of money as everybody who bought maybe 2 or 3 years prior to them, right? And that creates this division of basically anything you talk about when it comes to housing is a controversial topic here. But I bet people in like the Midwest United States, where a single family home has been like $120,000 for like 20 years, like I can picture a scenario where two people who rent are having a conversation being like, yeah, did you hear about Josh? He bought that house on East 33rd and the inspector screwed up and there was mold in the basement and the foundation is this and now he has to pay $30,000 to get it fixed. Oh, thank God we rent, right? Like in those markets where the home prices don't go up 7% every single year, there's probably a lot of people who just prefer to rent and don't feel bad about buying at all. So that begs the question, if our home prices here were to be more stable, trade flat for a long time, or maybe when they start going up, it's more stable growth, like 1 to 3% per year, are people going to care as much about being a homeowner? And I don't think they will. That's my opinion. So he says it's different for every person and each individual needs change over time, but I'm still a firm believer that renting is a great option. Despite rental prices having soared since publishing his book in 2016, Avery says renting is still cheaper and carries less risk than buying. People compare mortgage payments to monthly rental rates, but mortgage payments don't begin to cover the full cost of home ownership, he said. These costs can include notary fees, realtor commissions, and region-specific taxes when purchasing the property, as well as ongoing costs such as mortgage interest, property taxes, insurance, and various maintenance and repair expenses. My whole thing with the rent versus buy is that renting always looks like the cheaper option at first, right? Over like a 3, 5, and maybe even 7-year time span, you will have net more money if you chose to rent. Usually, right? The issue is that at some point, the house, like let's just say on day one, you decided to rent instead of buy. At some point, let's just say 5 years in the future, right? And let's say you get kicked out of the place you're renting and rent has gone up a whole bunch. Maybe rent costs now an extra $1,500 a month or an extra let's just say an extra $1,000 a month it costs for rent now, right? 5 to 7 years later, right? Well, now you have a decision where it's like, I can rent and pay the higher rent, which is still going to be cheaper than buying because now the cost to buy has also gone up. The price of that real estate has likely appreciated, right? So now your two options are more expensive or even more expensive than the renting, right? So you have two options where it's like, pick your poison, right? Whereas had you bought on day one, it would initially be more expensive for the first 5 years. But after that time period, now the renters are paying more than all of your costs to own that property. And the property itself might have, appreciated as well. The main argument for this is that in that window, that 5-year window where renting was cheaper than buying, you could have started a business, you could have invested your money, you could have done all of these things to capitalize on that free cash flow that you had by not purchasing to increase your net worth and buy all these assets that then covers the cost of you renting, which is very true. And I think that's a very real and legit argument for renting. The issue is that I think we're talking about a very small percentage of the population that can pull this off, that is good with their capital, that is motivated, driven, that want to be an entrepreneur, that are willing to do all these hard things and put themselves under immense stress to leverage their capital the most efficient way to seize the opportunity of renting as opposed to buying a home. Now, if renting were the better option for everybody via Dan Foch, I think you would see the wealth gap between the renters and the homeowners probably be a lot closer, right? The average renter has what seems to be a $50,000 net worth in comparison to $450,000 for Canadians who own homes, and this is people under 35. Now, a lot of this is going to be the equity they gained in the Canadian real estate bubble, but I'm also willing to bet a lot of this is because this group of people is probably paying way lower expenses than this group of people, because if you bought your home in like 2017, you're going to be paying, your mortgage payment is going to be a lot lower than now what it costs to rent that same property on the renter side. So if renting was objectively a better option for every single person, I think you would see this gap be a lot closer than what it is. So Avery was inspired to write his book during what he calls was a speculative bubble in the housing market at that time that he said created a perception of home ownership as an easy out for savings, especially in urban centers like Toronto and Vancouver. Young Canadians were being pressured to buy a condo when the math never made sense. And it doesn't make sense in the short term. It doesn't make sense to buy a home and pay an extra $1,500 a month to live in that home right now. But typically speaking, 5 years from now, you'll be like, okay, I understand why I did that, right? Vancouver realtor Owen Bigland. I got a funny story about Owen Bigland. In 2017, I was in my plumbing van driving through Vancouver. You don't know Owen Bigland. He's like the OG of OGs. This guy was creating Vancouver real estate YouTube videos when I was like freaking 12 years old, right? I'm like driving out of this alleyway in my plumbing van, and a guy walks right in front of me as I'm like trying to take a left, right? I'm like, oh shit, that's Owen Bigland. So I roll down my window. I'm like, yo, Owen. And then I got out of my truck, I parked my truck. And when I talked to him, I told him like, hey man, I want to be a realtor. I like what you do and blah, 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 blah. And he gave me some good words of wisdom. So that's pretty cool. But anyways, so his calculations paint a different picture. However, with average monthly rent for a one-bedroom unit in his city now hovering around $2,800, a lifetime renter could spend at least $1.3 million by the time they're 65. This is the other thing people say, right? When you buy a home for $1 million, you're not paying $1 million, because once you add all the interest, you're actually paying like double for that house over the lifespan of your mortgage, right? So if a 25-year mortgage, you buy the house for $1 million, you add up all the interest, you're actually paying $2 million in 25 years, right? Which is true. But again, the property you bought is probably going to be worth more than $2 million, right? So all of those costs are being negated by the appreciation that you got. Whereas if you were to just rent your entire life and pay $1.3 million in rent, you're just straight up losing the $1.3 million in rent, which he says you'll have zero to show for it. Where's the savings here? Well, there are no savings, right? The only argument is that had you taken the money that you saved that you would have had instead of buying the property, you could have invested that money and made more money with that money, right? But again, very few people are going to be able to effectively do that. Even if monthly rent was cheaper than a mortgage payment, Bigland said, many Canadians will likely spend any savings rather than invest it and grow their wealth. Exactly, right? So I think renting is better for the right person, but I don't think it's objectively better for everybody. A lot of Canadians don't have the discipline to save as much as they should. With rents making up at least a third of household expenditures and homes making up 70 to 80% of homeowners' wealth portfolios, renters and homeowners alike are exposing themselves to big risks. More than a third of Canadians report having less than $5,000 in savings, and those who own a home are increasingly relying on their home equity to fund their retirement. Bigland preaches home ownership for this very reason. He encourages chipping away at your mortgage and building equity so you can benefit from any price appreciation in the future. The only real cash shelter we get in Canada is the principal residence exemption. Put another way, you're essentially renting the home from yourself. He adds that your home can act as a collateral should you need to borrow against it someday. Most mortgages from big banks typically include a built-in home equity line of credit at a favorable rate. According to Bigland, it's accessible money without selling your home. So this Avery gentleman then says it presupposes that housing is a safer investment than any other investments, he said. There are many places where house prices have gone down, where employment prospects change over time. And then he goes on to talk about TFSAs and ETFs and everything, which again, I agree with. The problem with this though is that most people aren't going to be able to do it. They don't have the emotional discipline to every week buy into an ETF or buy into an index and then not hit the sell button when Donald Trump is arguing with somebody on Twitter every 2 hours, or not hit the sell button when World War III is kicking off, or not hit the sell button when the mortgage forbearance period is up, or every 3 weeks how there's some black swan that like makes everybody shit their pants. To ignore all of that and just buy into the index. Most people aren't going to be able to do that over a long enough time frame. Where when you buy a home, you can guarantee that basically the value of the dollars that I'm using to pay down this mortgage go down every year, right? If I have $1,000 mortgage payment and inflation's at 3%, well, the value of my mortgage payment isn't $1,000 next year. Next year, it's $970 in today money. I'm paying it down with cheaper dollars, right? So it's like inflation chips away at the value of your investment on your home, right? Like if you buy $1 million home and you use $200,000 down to buy that home, and that home doesn't appreciate, next year your $200,000 down payment is worth 3% less. But if you have 800 grand worth of debt on that home, well, the debt is also worth less. So when you own real estate, even if the price were to just do nothing for 25 years, well, at least you can guarantee that your cost of living is getting cheaper every year, because the real value of your mortgage payment is going down every year. You have the option to refinance in 5 or 7 years and roll that payment out 30 years again if you want to drop your payment. You have more options to do more things. And I think everybody forgets that there are other benefits to owning a home other than just making money, right? I am down to pay the additional amount of money to own instead of rent because I like the security and knowing that I get to continue living here for as long as I want. I can paint it. I can do whatever I want with them. I can customize it any which way I want. And I don't have to worry about living here for a year and potentially getting kicked out and then having to find another place in potentially a less desirable area and a building that I don't want to be in, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And especially for people that have kids, right? Your kids are in this school district and they've built a life there. They have friends in that school district. You have friends in that area, right? You don't want to have to get kicked out of your rental and then, have to drive your kids 20 minutes to school every morning and stuff like that. So there's a lot of benefits to owning as opposed to just how much money am I making. And I think owning a home going forward probably isn't going to build you massive, massive wealth and make you a millionaire like it has for people in the past. But I do think guaranteed will make your life easier over the course of time, where renting is not necessarily, it's guaranteed pretty much that the rents are going to go higher. The cost of living is going to go higher every year. And unless you're smart with your money, you are constantly fighting against the clock ticking down, so to speak. You have a limited amount of time to make your investments do something for you. Otherwise, your cost of living is going to be higher than it otherwise would have been had you just bought the home. But anyways, that's my opinion on that. If you are very well educated, motivated, driven, blah, 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 renting is going to be better for you. If you're just like me and everybody else, I would say probably better to buy a home. And if you're interested in doing that, link down in the description. Otherwise, I'm that Agent Kelly. Appreciate you for watching. I'm making moves to move you. Peace.